Imagine a room, right? A room with over 500 of the world's most educated people in it.
We're talking about PhDs, the kind of people who usually speak in very dry, cautious charts.
Exactly. But instead of some academic report, they released this thing that reads more like a desperate distress signal. They call it the Dardington Declaration.
And what's so striking about it isn't just the tone, the urgency, it's the evidence they use.
It's so specific and haunting. They're not talking about future hypotheticals anymore.
No, not at all. They're pointing to the unprecedented death of coral reefs.
And saying that this is the proof that we haven't just, walked up to the cliff's edge.
We've tipped over, at least the first edge. To these scientists, the danger zone isn't some prediction on a chart for 2050.
It's the room we're already standing in.
And then you get this absolutely jarring contradiction.
Right. Just as these experts are warning that the Amazon, the lungs of the earth, is actually starting to release carbon.
And that our soil, our degraded soil, is pumping out as much CO2 every year as the entire United States.
The political response feels like it's happening on a different planet.
Completely disconnected. The recent COP30 meeting in Brazil, it just wrapped up.
And what came out of it?
Not even a basic roadmap to phase out fossil fuels.
It creates this surreal, terrifying split screen. On one side, you have the alarm bells ringing louder than ever, backed by actual irretrievable loss.
And on the other, the people who are supposedly holding the fire extinguishers, well, they couldn't even agree on how to turn on the hose.
Okay, so let's unpack that. We have this massive emergency signal from the scientific community, the Declaration.
And it's demanding this unprecedented action. Having a global emissions by 2030.
Net zero by 2050. Just to have a chance.
But that political inertia, the thing we saw at COP30, it suggests, total complacency.
The data is screaming existential crisis.
Yeah.
But the action is just whispering incremental adjustments.
And what's so fascinating here is the sheer audacity of the analysis we're digging into today. It addresses that exact contradiction head on.
It doesn't waste time on small policy tweaks.
No, or, calls for everyone to just use less. Instead, it argues for a radical, explicit pivot.
Towards what?
Towards technological acceleration. This perspective says that the only thing that can match the scale of this crisis is a hard power strategy.
Driven by engineering.
Engineering ingenuity, deployed at a global scale. The argument is that the solution isn't less growth, but better, faster growth.
So we're not talking about marginal improvements here.
Yeah.
We're looking at a fundamental shift, a three-part transformation, really.
It's a call for 3 necessary strategic reversals. And we're going to dive into each one.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is all about energy. It's about why the whole strategy of just reducing fossil fuels, which almost always leads to scarcity and political backlash, why that has to be replaced.
Replaced with what?
With engineered energy abundance, powered primarily by advanced nuclear technology.
Okay, that's a big one. What's the second shift?
The second is carbon removal. It argues that relying on slow, natural solutions, the romantic idea of just planting trees.
It's too slow.
Fundamentally too slow and too fragile for the emergency we're in now. It demands industrial-scale engineering to physically reverse the carbon in the atmosphere.
And the third piece?
The third piece is maybe the biggest obstacle. It's cultural and bureaucratic. It's something the analysis calls anti-growth safetyism.
And the argument is that this safetyism is the biggest barrier to deploying all the solutions we just talked about.
Exactly. It's the thing holding everything back.
That is a confronting agenda. Let's start right there with that first idea, the one where the resistance is probably highest, energy abundance.
Right, because for decades, the story we've been told is that green energy means restraint. It means austerity and reduction.
You have to use less. That's been the message.
And that's precisely why the whole approach has failed to keep up with the problem. You can see this failure of scarcity really clearly if you imagine a scenario.
Okay.
Think of a grid operations manager. Let's call him Elias, somewhere in Central Europe. His region commits to that big goal, having emissions by 2030.
So they're following the science, doing what the Declaration asks for.
They are. And to do it, they shut down their reliable baseload power. Often, it's older nuclear fission plants that get closed because of political pressure and safety concerns.
Okay, so the reliable power is gone. What replaces it?
Wind and solar, mostly. But then you have a day where the sun starts to set, solar output plummets, and the air is still. The wind turbines, they stop spinning.
What does Elias, our grid manager, do then? He can't just call for more investment.
He can't. He has to call for load shedding.
Which is just a technical term for mandatory power cuts.
Exactly. Power cuts to industrial users, sometimes even to entire neighborhoods. And the human cost of that is immediate.
It hits people like, say, a factory foreman who runs an aluminum smelter, something that needs a ton of power.
Right. When his power gets cut, he is not thinking about stabilizing the climate in 2050. He is thinking about deindustrialization. He's thinking about massive financial losses.
And how he's going to make payroll and feed his family.
Precisely. It makes sustainability feel like economic misery. It turns climate action into a political liability that the average person, like that foreman, will naturally, and maybe even rightly, oppose.
If your climate goals force people out of work, they're politically dead on arrival.
They're completely unsustainable, socially and politically. The macro challenge is you have to align these ambitious climate targets with the fundamental human need for growth and prosperity.
So the analysis is clear. You need massive, reliable, clean energy replacement.
A replacement that delivers abundance, not mandated reduction. The story of Elias just shows that the only way to satisfy both the factory foreman's job and the scientist's climate goals is with tech that provides power 2047 all year round.
But let's get a reality check here. Nuclear power, which is the textbook definition of baseload energy, has been struggling for decades.
Dramatically, the figures are stark. I mean, the global share of electricity from nuclear has fallen from around 18% in the late 1990s.
All the way down to just 9% today.
And that decline is really crucial context. It was driven by a combination of things. Massive public fear after accidents like 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and of course Fukushima.
And the regulatory environment became crushing.
Crushing cost and time penalties. And the designs themselves just weren't innovating quickly enough. That 9% figure is the result of decades of stagnation.
But the argument is that the external environment is now changing.
It's changing fast. And it's pushing the private sector back towards nuclear mainly because of two huge factors: the explosion in demand from AI and the simple failure of renewables to provide enough grid stability on their own.
But AI and electrification surge is just staggering. I mean, every projection says global electricity demand will nearly double by 2050.
And data centers are the tip of that spear. Their power demand is forecast to jump by 165% by 2030.
That's just a few years away.
It is. Goldman Sachs estimates that this surge alone means we'll have to build 60% new generation capacity in the next 7 years.
And the big tech companies, the hyperscalers, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they have these huge net zero commitments.
They do, but they're struggling with the core problem of wind and solar: reliability. They need firm, dispatchable power.
So if you're Microsoft and you need to build a giant new data center complex, you need power that is on all the time, is dense enough to be sited nearby, and meets your carbon goals.
And that logic, it inevitably leads you right back to nuclear fission.
So we're seeing this in the real world now.
We are. It's a major revival, and you can see it in the form of these massive power purchase agreements, or PPAs, from the hyperscalers.
Like Microsoft signing that deal to help restart the 3 Mile Island plant.
An 835 megawatt PPA. And Amazon signed one for nearly 2 gigawatts of nuclear electricity to power data centers in Pennsylvania.
It confirms that for these huge, constant power loads, the scale of a big traditional fission plant, a gigawatt or more, is still incredibly attractive.
Absolutely. But the future isn't just about restarting old plants. It's about the evolution of fission itself.
Which brings us to small modular reactors, or SMRs. This is really the foundation of the tactical nuclear strategy.
SMRs are a fundamental shift in the engineering. They're defined by their size, up to 300 megawatts, and critically, their modular design.
What does modular actually mean in this context?
It means the components can be mass-produced in a factory, like a car or an airplane. Then they're shipped to the site for assembly.
Which minimizes all that expensive, unpredictable on-site construction that plagued the old reactors.
Exactly. That modularity is the key to solving the decades-long problem of cost overruns and construction delays.
Because traditional reactor construction was just crippling. I mean, Plant Volkel, the last 2 reactors built in the U.S., took something like 15 years.
And cost over $35 billion, more than double what was projected.
You compare that to China, which averages, 7 years for a large reactor?
Right. SMRs are designed to completely bypass that entire regulatory and construction mess.
But beyond the modularity, there are real technical differences that make them more compelling, not just cheaper.
Absolutely. Many of these new SMR designs use advanced coolants, molten salt, liquid metal, high-temperature gas, instead of the huge high-pressure water systems in traditional reactors.
And what does that allow for?
It allows for something called passive safety mechanisms.
Okay, unpack that for us. What's the practical difference between active and passive safety?
In an old plant, safety relied on active systems, pumps, valves, and a human operator flipping switches to stop it from overheating.
So if the power went out, those pumps would stop.
And you'd have a major problem. Passive safety means the reactor uses the laws of physics, things like gravity or natural convection, to shut itself down and cool the core.
Without any operator input? Or even any external power?
Even during a total blackout, it fundamentally changes the risk profile. It makes an event like Fukushima physically impossible.
And that is absolutely crucial for getting the public and regulators to accept them.
It's a game changer.
So SMRs are smaller, theoretically cheaper and faster, and inherently safer. This makes them a perfect fit for decentralized loads.
Right. It's like giving Elias, our grid manager, a stable, carbon-free power source he can place right next to that factory foreman's aluminum smelter.
The theoretical advantages are clear. But commercialization is hitting a major wall, right? A geopolitical one.
A huge one. And it's all tied to the specialized fuel these new reactors need. High-assay, low-enriched uranium.
ALEU.
ALEU. It's uranium enriched to between 5% and 20%, which makes these new reactors much more efficient.
But the vulnerability here it's staggering.
It is. Here's the geopolitical bind we're in. Russia's state nuclear company, Rosatom, and specifically its subsidiary Tenex, is right now the only commercial producer of ALEU in the world.
The only one.
The only commercial one. So the U.S. has to rely heavily on imports from them. Our own domestic enrichment capacity is tiny, maybe 8% of the global total, and it's all geared for a lower enriched fuel.
How did we get here? How did the U.S., the country that pioneered nuclear tech, end up dependent on Russia for the fuel of the future?
It's the result of decades of policy choices. After the Cold War, the U.S. nuclear complex was largely privatized.
And private companies don't make long-term strategic investments if there's no immediate market.
Exactly. The long-term expensive investment needed to maintain high-capacity enrichment facilities just wasn't sustained as the industry shrank.
Meanwhile, Russia did the opposite.
They maintained and centralized their entire fuel cycle under state control. They made strategic investments regardless of market cycles.
So we're facing a critical choke point. It feels like a repeat of Europe's dependence on Russian gas.
It's a very similar strategic dependency, and the U.S. is now scrambling to mitigate it.
What does that look like?
Massive, accelerated efforts to basically recreate a domestic ALEU pipeline from scratch. The government is working with private industry, using facilities like the Idaho National Laboratory to try and kickstart production.
But that's not a fast process.
It takes years. Uranium enrichment is a complex industrial process. It means, for the time being, we are highly exposed. The success of SMRs depends just as much on conquering this geopolitical supply chain problem as it does on the technology itself.
Okay, so this reliance on fission, even advanced fission, is still based on mining and sensitive fuels.
It is, which is why it's the bridge.
And that brings us to the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Fusion. If fission is the necessary bridge to get us through the next few decades, fusion is the ultimate abundance strategy.
It's the technology that promises to completely redefine our relationship with energy.
So fusion, it's a process that powers the sun.
Right. You're combining light atomic nuclei, usually isotopes of hydrogen, to form a heavier one, and that releases an enormous amount of energy.
And the numbers are just hard to comprehend.
They really are. Fusion releases 4 million times more energy per unit of mass than burning coal or oil, and the fuel isotopes of hydrogen can be extracted from seawater,
making the fuel supply effectively limitless.
Virtually limitless. But the safety aspect is what's truly transformative. It just completely removes the dangers that we associate with fission.
How so?
It's inherent in the physics. A fusion reaction needs plasma heated to over 100 million degrees Celsius, held under incredibly precise conditions.
So any failure, any disruption at all,
instantly causes the plasma to cool down and the reaction just stops, dead. There is no physical possibility of a runaway chain reaction, no meltdown, and no need for long-term geological storage of high-level waste.
Which is why the regulators treat it differently.
Exactly. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission regulates it under the rules for particle accelerators, which are far, far less restrictive than the massive safety regimes that govern fission.
And we've seen real, tangible milestones in just the last couple of years that prove this isn't just science fiction anymore.
The whole field crossed a major threshold in December 2022 at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory.
That's when U.S. scientists first achieved ignition.
Right, Q greater than 1, meaning the fusion reaction generated more energy than the laser energy they put in to start it.
And that was the starting gun.
It was the commercial starting gun, and they've reproduced it multiple times since. And on the other side of fusion research, magnetic confinement, we just saw the West reactor in France set a new record for plasma duration.
Over 22 minutes, right? Surpassing the record from China's East reactor.
Correct. These are tangible engineering proof points.
What's fascinating to me is the role AI is playing in all of this. It's not just humans driving these breakthroughs anymore.
That's absolutely true. The central challenge of fusion is controlling that incredibly unstable plasma.
And AI is helping to solve that.
It's essential now. At places like the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, they're using advanced AI models to predict and prevent plasma instabilities in real time.
Making millisecond adjustments to the magnetic fields.
Exactly. This integration of AI and high-performance computing is just radically speeding up the whole R&D timeline. It's compressing what would have been decades of work into a much shorter period.
And this progress is translated into serious, aggressive commercial conviction.
The conviction is very high. Microsoft signed the first ever commercial fusion PPA with a company called Helion Energy.
For 50 megawatts, with delivery expected by 2028, that's incredibly soon.
It is. And then Commonwealth Fusion Systems secured deals with Google and the Italian energy company Eni. They're aiming to generate electricity by the early 2030s.
The financial world is clearly taking this seriously.
The projected market for fusion is expected to exceed $1 trillion by 2050. This isn't a science experiment anymore. It's seen as the eventual ultimate energy source.
So the U.S. clearly dominates in the private, venture-backed innovation space. But the global race with China is turning this into a serious geopolitical national security competition.
It is. The U.S. position is strong on the private capital side, for sure. We have 25 of the 45 private fusion companies in the world, and we attract about 80% of all private funding.
But China is executing a massive state-backed strategy that we can't ignore.
A completely integrated strategy. It's characterized by overwhelming government investment that goes way beyond basic science and into rapid infrastructure deployment.
How much are we talking?
China is reportedly investing about $1.5 billion a year. That's nearly double the U.S. government's current funding level.
And it's systematic.
It's their whole nation system. It coordinates government, universities, and industrial manufacturing all towards one single goal. They produce 10 times more fusion PhDs than the U.S. They led in fusion patents filed last year.
So while the U.S. excels at the foundational science, China is just relentlessly building capacity.
And this infrastructure-first approach is designed to seize the global manufacturing and supply chain advantage.
It's a calculated move.
Absolutely. China is building these monumental research facilities, like the Trafti campus, which is set to be completed soon. But even more important is their next big machine.
The China Fusion Engineering Test Reactor, CFETR.
Which is aiming very ambitiously for 1 gigawatt of fusion power output by the early 2030s. This state-led, infrastructure-heavy approach could allow them to dominate global deployment, even if the U.S. makes the first big scientific breakthroughs.
And we're already seeing them positioned to control the critical material supply chains.
Just like they did with solar panels and batteries years ago.
It's the same playbook.
It is. Take tungsten. It's a leading candidate material for the inner walls of fusion machines because it can handle the extreme heat. China controls over half the world's tungsten reserves and produces about 80% of the world's supply.
So they could turn our scientific lead into a strategic dependence, allowing them to define the future of global energy.
That's the critical risk that needs attention right now.
The stakes are so high that commissions, like the SCSP, are being formed just to address this gap. What are they recommending?
The SCSP, the Commission on the Scaling of Fusion Energy, their preliminary report outlines 3 immediate aggressive actions. First, the U.S. government must formally declare fusion a national security priority,
which unlocks resources and cuts through bureaucracy.
Instantly elevates it. Second, they recommend creating a dedicated fusion lead within the Department of Energy, a single high-level official with the authority and budget to drive commercialization and just dismantle obstacles.
And the third recommendation?
This is the most crucial one, a substantial one-time strategic investment of $10 billion.
And that money isn't just for more lab work.
No, it's explicitly aimed at building the deployment infrastructure. It's designed to de-risk multiple commercial pilot plants, accelerate R&D focused on deployment, and build out the critical research facilities we need.
So the goal is to get a plant built.
The overarching national goal they propose is clear. The U.S. must start construction on the world's first commercial fusion power plant this decade. Solidify U.S. leadership not just in the lab, but in the marketplace.
Okay, so the strategy for energy is clear. Shift from scarcity to abundance, driven by advanced nuclear. Now let's pivot to that second theme. The industrial-scale engineering needed to clean up the carbon we've already put up there.
Right. The Dardington Declaration called for expanding sustainable carbon removal, restoring forests, things like that.
But the core argument we're looking at today suggests that relying on nature alone is, well, it's too slow, too fragile, and too limited.
And you can really feel this point when you think about it through the analogy of, say, a marine biologist. Let's call her Dr. Aris.
The Declaration used the unprecedented death of coral reefs as its ultimate proof point.
So Dr. Aris is there, watching her life's work, this reef, turn into a gray skeleton in real time. For her, the suggestion to go plant a sapling that grows a few inches a year,
when her entire ecosystem is dying today,
it feels like an insufficient, even a tragic response.
It's a really profound realization. The crisis was caused by the speed of industrialization, so trying to solve it with the slow pace of nature just doesn't compute.
Her realization that to save nature, we might have to apply the brute force of engineering is a powerful frame for this entire argument.
It forces us to look at the numbers.
It does. Natural processes, the oceans and the land, they've absorbed roughly 56% of all human emissions so far. They've been an enormous essential buffer for us.
But the key word there is have. The future is now uncertain.
Highly uncertain and potentially degrading.
Is there hard evidence that these natural sinks are hitting some kind of limit, a saturation point?
Yes, there is. Recent data suggests that the trend of the land sink's increasing capacity may have slowed down.
And that's deeply concerning.
It is, because it could signal the beginning of this saturation point in the Earth system, where rising temperatures and extreme weather actually start to degrade the land's ability to soak up carbon.
You see this with droughts, for example.
Exactly. We see strong correlating evidence. Climate models often fail to capture just how sensitive the carbon cycle is to tropical droughts. When you have a major drought and trees start dying in a huge forest, you can directly measure the decrease in carbon sink capacity.
So as the climate crisis gets worse, the very nature-based solutions we're told to rely on, like forests, they become more vulnerable and less effective.
Which highlights their inherent instability. And this is a critical point that needs more scrutiny.
What are the main shortcomings of these nature-based solutions, or NBS?
Well, first is that overwhelming vulnerability. You invest billions in a forest to store carbon. Then a single wildfire, made worse by climate change, can release all of that stored carbon right back into the atmosphere,
negating the entire climate gain in a matter of days.
Exactly. Storms, pests, they present similar existential risks.
Then there's the issue of permanence. A CO2 molecule from burning fossil fuels is a long-term problem.
A very long-term problem, and that's the second key failing of NBS. They typically store carbon for maybe 50 to 100 years.
Compare that to an engineered solution,
which promises permanent sequestration, usually deep underground in geological reservoirs, for over 100,000 years.
So a 100-year solution for a 1,000-year problem is just not enough.
It's inadequate to solve the atmospheric stock problem.
There's also a really nuanced critique about the albedo effect. The idea that planting trees doesn't always equal cooling the planet.
That's the third critical shortcoming. Climate feedbacks. If you go plant dark, dense pine trees in a high-latitude area that's usually covered in snow,
the dark trees absorb more sunlight than the white reflective snow.
Much more. This reduces the landscape's albedo, creating a local heating effect that can, in some cases, actually outweigh the carbon storage benefit from the trees.
It just shows the relationship between nature and carbon is way more complex than just plant more trees.
Far more complex, and then you have the huge structural problems with the current carbon offset markets.
The integrity issues. Things like leakage and additionality.
This is where the whole commercial model falls apart. Leakage is when you protect one forest, but it just pushes the loggers or the pollution over to the next forest,
canceling out the benefit.
Right. And additionality is the really big one. That's when you pay to protect a forest that was never actually in danger of being cut down in the first place.
So the money is spent, but there's no additional climate benefit. Yet a company gets to slap a net zero label on its product.
Exactly. And the research suggests that a huge percentage of current offset programs are delivering little to no real, verifiable climate benefit.
And if we look at the sheer scale required for NDS to actually make a dent in the 1.5-degree pathway, the amount of land you'd need it's enormous.
It is. You're talking about covering millions, if not billions of acres, which immediately puts you in conflict with other essential human needs.
Like agriculture. We need to feed a growing population.
And biodiversity conservation. The trade-offs become immense. You're forced into these impossible policy choices. Do you prioritize carbon storage or do you prioritize food security?
So what's the proposed fix for the integrity issue?
It's a structural reform, shifting corporate engagement away from claiming these dubious carbon offset credits and toward making scientifically honest contributions.
Explain that difference.
A contribution is when a company gives money to support a climate goal, but without falsely claiming that the investment immediately cancels out their own emissions. It's more scientifically accurate, it's more legally defensible.
And ironically, it might lead to better projects.
It would, because those projects would face less scrutiny over fraudulent claims of additionality.
So given all these fragilities, the land conflicts, the slow pace, the fire risk, the permanence issue, the conclusion is that industrial-scale engineered solutions are the only non-negotiable imperative.
They are the necessity if we are serious about that Dardington timeline. Engineered solutions, or ES, use industrial processes like direct air capture DC and carbon capture and storage CCS.
And their advantages are
Rapid scalability, high predictability, and most important, that long-term permanence of over 100,000 years. They offer the brute force engineering we need to lower atmospheric carbon concentrations quickly and for good.
Dyne is really the cornerstone of this, but for a lot of people, it's still a bit of a black box. How does it actually work?
Think of it like a giant industrial chemical dehumidifier, but for CO2. There are two main ways to do it commercially. One uses solid materials called sorbents.
Like a giant sponge.
For perfect analogy. Air is passed over these sorbents and they chemically bind to the CO2 molecules. Then you apply some relatively low heat and it releases a pure, concentrated stream of CO2.
Okay, the second method.
The second uses liquid solvents in larger chemical plants. Air is bubbled through a tower with a chemical solution that scrubs the CO2 out. This process needs more energy, usually high heat, to release the pure CO2.
But in both cases, the end product is the same, a pure stream of CO2 ready to be stored.
Ready for permanent sequestration.
So what happens to that captured CO2 to make sure it stays put for 100,000 years?
That's the storage part of CCS. The captured CO2 is compressed and injected deep, deep underground into suitable geological formations.
Like old oil and gas fields.
Saline aquifers, depleted oil and gas fields, yeah. The pressure and the rock formations down there permanently trap it. And because it's physically removed and stored geologically, it bypasses all the vulnerabilities of biological storage. No fire risk, no pest risk, no saturation risk.
But DDAC is expensive. It requires a lot of energy and a lot of infrastructure.
Absolutely. Those are the trade-offs. It requires huge upfront capital, and because the tech is new, the initial costs are high.
But the core argument remains.
It remains, reinforced by the desperate reality of Dr. Eris watching her reef die. If the goal is to actually save nature on this collapsing timeline, then prioritizing industrial duty is necessary to physically turn down the global thermostat before the planet's own systems collapse entirely.
So we have these two massive technological strategies. Energy abundance through advanced nuclear, carbon reversal through industrial DAC. We have the blueprints.
We do.
But as we see in the next thought experiment, the one about Sarah the fusion physicist, having the technology means nothing if you can't actually deploy it.
And that brings us to the third theme, and maybe the biggest challenge of all, the regulatory roadblock.
Sarah's struggle perfectly frames this problem. She's an innovator, she's solved these profound physics problems, but her advanced fusion concept is completely blocked.
Not by science, not by a lack of money, but by bureaucrats, by regulators applying outdated, rigid nuclear fission rules from the 1970s to her brand new, completely different fusion technology.
She is stalled by what the analysis calls Anti-Growth Safetyism, or AGS.
We need to define that carefully because it's not the same as just standard reasonable safety regulations.
Right. What's the distinction?
AGS is defined as this deep-seated cultural and bureaucratic force that prioritizes cover your ass and zero risk standards above everything else, above economic dynamism, above innovation, above speed.
So standard regulation adds friction and cost.
AGS just stops innovation cold. It erects impossible, non-negotiable barriers, all in the name of total safety. And it leaves technologies like fusion, advanced batteries, even new types of airplanes stuck in these perpetual, decades-long review cycles.
And the nuclear industry is the classic example of AGS in action.
It's the ultimate example. The requirement for nuclear power to keep radiation levels as low as reasonably achievable. Lara.
It sounds so virtuous.
It sounds great, but in practice, it's an infinite compliance standard. It demands continuous, expensive optimization, even when radiation exposure is already far below risky levels.
Even below natural background radiation.
In some cases, yes.
So help us understand the operational cost of that. How does this marginal compliance actually kill a project?
Okay, imagine a utility builds a new SMR that is already 100 times safer than the law requires. LRA compels them to keep spending money to reduce that dose rate even further.
Even if the reduction is tiny and costs millions.
Even if it's a 1% reduction that costs $100 million, they might have to add more shielding, implement new costly procedures just to prove they're being reasonable.
It just consumes any economic return from the technology getting better.
It prevents the industry from ever driving down costs over time. The fundamental attitude of AGS prioritizing zero risk over a rapid deployment is what slows everything down.
And this analysis of AGS suggests it hasn't just hurt climate tech. It's penalized our overall economic growth for decades.
The claims, based on economic modeling, are pretty stark. There's one study by economists Dawson and Cedar that suggested if this regulatory accumulation had been avoided over the last half-century,
U.S. median household income would be 3 times higher, something like $185,000 today.
Which is a provocative claim. It relies on some broad assumptions. But there's a more conservative, robust estimate that still yields some shocking figures.
From the OECD, right?
That's right. A more granular OECD study that focused specifically on product market regulation. It found that this regulatory buildup cuts U.S. GDP growth by about 1 percentage point every year.
And the loss is primarily in something called total factor productivity, or TFP.
Which is what economists really care about.
Okay, so we need a clear definition. Why is TFP so crucial, and how does regulation hit it so hard?
So traditional growth comes from adding more labor hiring, more people, or adding more capital building, more factories. TFP is the part of your growth that comes from getting smarter.
From innovation.
It's finding a more efficient way to use the workers and factories you already have. It is the engine of sustained long-term prosperity. It's driven entirely by technological and organizational innovation.
So when you block the deployment of SMRs or DC with this AGS mindset,
you are directly preventing technological innovation from entering the economy. You are dragging down TFP.
So if we take that 1% drag on TFP and apply it over the same post-war period, what does that more conservative estimate tell us?
It suggests that if growth had been just 1 percentage point higher since the late 1940s, the median U.S. household income today would be around $117,000 instead of where it is now.
That is still a profound result. It suggests that just reforming these policies could have an economic impact on par with massive changes to, say, immigration or housing policy.
It's huge.
But I have to push back here. The justification for these agencies and their zero-risk approach is public health, avoiding environmental catastrophe. How does this analysis justify trading potentially weaker standards on clean air or water for that extra income?
And that is the absolute crux of the ideological conflict. The argument is that while some friction is necessary, AGS prioritizes an imagined risk over a proven catastrophic risk, which is climate change.
Just a performance of caution, not a real risk calculation.
In many cases, yes. In Sarah's case, with fusion, the technology is inherently safe, yet it's stalled by rules meant for something completely different. Furthermore, the economic cost of AGS limits the capital we have to solve other real problems, like actual environmental cleanups.
So we need to move from a standard of zero risk to calculated proportional risk.
A standard that weighs the existential threat of climate change against the marginal risk of a new, safer technology.
Which suggests that overcoming this regulatory inertia isn't just about saving money, it's about national security and environmental survival.
And this whole battle has led to this fierce ideological conflict we're seeing play out now between deceleration and effective accelerationism.
The divide is stark. On one side, you have the deceleration faction, the degrowth movement.
The natural adversaries of the growth-focused engineers. They advocate for actively reducing economic activity, scaling back consumption, prioritizing extreme caution.
They believe that industrial growth itself is the problem.
Fundamentally. And on the other side, you have the rise of effective accelerationism, or EACH.
Which has gained a lot of visibility in Silicon Valley, with VCs like Mark Andreessen endorsing it.
EAG is fundamentally techno-optimist. Their core philosophy is that unrestricted technological progress, especially centered on the deployment of artificial general intelligence, or AGI, is the universal solution for human problems, including climate change.
They believe the only way out is through
Massive technological leverage. Their ultimate goal is almost sci-fi. They talk about wanting to climb the Kardashev gradient.
What does that actually mean in practical terms?
The Kardashev scale measures a civilization's mastery over energy. A Type I civilization can harness all the energy available on its home planet.
So their goal is to maximize energy usage, hence the obsession with fusion abundance.
And technological control. They see limits as temporary challenges, not permanent boundaries, which is a direct contrast to the deceleration mindset.
So given that philosophy, what is their stance on the very regulations we've been talking about?
They are strongly opposed to precautionary regulation and government intervention. They argue that decentralized free markets and rapid competitive development are the best way to innovate and also to mitigate risks.
They see the caution that stalled Sarah's fusion reactor as the single biggest threat to human survival.
Which brings us back to that ultimate paradox of safetyism. By prioritizing this extreme caution and blocking necessary new technologies like fusion and DAC,
the decel mindset is arguably doing the exact opposite of what it intends.
Precisely. The argument is that this decelerating mindset is acting as a risk multiplier. By obstructing the rapid deployment of these large-scale tech solutions, it is actively ensuring the global catastrophe climate collapse that it claims to be preventing.
So if you accept the urgency of the Dardington Declaration,
then slowing down the solution is, by definition, the greatest danger we face. The engineers are essentially saying the time for incremental safety adjustments is over. We need wartime mobilization speed.
This has been a deep dive into an intentionally aggressive, technology-first perspective. The Dardington Declaration gave us the problem, the urgent, existential problem.
We've entered the danger zone. Coral reefs are dying. The Amazon is releasing carbon.
And the analysis we've reviewed provides this radical three-part technological answer that really challenges the established climate policy framework.
We've synthesized this overarching argument, which demands a paradigm shift from incrementalism to aggressive technological acceleration on three fronts.
First, in energy. The shift has to be from a strategy of mandated scarcity, like in Elias's story, to one of engineered abundance.
Which requires massive state-backed investment in the fusion race and the rapid deployment of safer, mass-producible, small modular reactors to meet that exploding demand.
Second, in carbon removal. The pivot must be from relying on slow, fragile nature, which is now showing signs of saturation and vulnerability, the reality Dr. Earth was observing, to fast, durable industrial engineering.
Through technologies like direct air capture, which guarantee that long-term permanence and scalability.
And finally, in governance. The crucial shift has to be away from that risk-averse anti-growth safetyism, the regulatory hurdle that stalled Sarah's innovation,
to a framework that embraces high-speed development and accepts calculated risk, so we can deploy these civilization-saving technologies at the speed the crisis demands.
So if we accept the premise that climate change is an existential threat demanding a rapid wartime mobilization of technology,
then the analysis suggests the greatest obstacle to human survival is not a lack of scientific ingenuity. It is a deep-seated cultural and regulatory refusal to let the builders build. The technology is either here or it's on the immediate horizon. The real question is whether our systems will allow us to grasp it in time.